Have you ever wondered what the first video game was? I know I sure have. Hell, that's why I started this harebrained idea of playing every video game ever made to begin with. You might think that video games started with Atari and Pong way back in the day. Some of you who are even a bit more in the know might be aware of the likes of Space War and Tennis for Two, or even OXO from all the way back in 1952. And yet still, none of those are the first video game. But that's what we're here for today. So sit back and join me on this new, rebooted journey to explore the history of video games, year by year, game by game. Now, if you think that OXO game from 1952 I just mentioned is impossibly early for a video game, I'm about to make things even more impossible for you. We're taking the creation of video games back to 1947, a mere 2 years after the conclusion of World War II. Now, as a millennial, and I'm sure plenty of you can relate to this, I can't even comprehend the idea of a video game existing in 1947. That's 50 years before I was even born. It's ancient history, like the Genesis creation account of video games we're talking about here. In the beginning, there were cathode-ray tubes. And one man, Thomas Tolliver Goldsmith Jr., said, "Let's make a game with one." And so, alongside his co-conspirator Estel Ray Mann, the cathode-ray tube amusement device was born. Nice name. Rolls off the tongue real nicely. Now, Tom Goldsmith Jr. had a long and storied career in the TV industry, which I don't have time to go over here. He was a pioneer in many areas of the industry that we take for granted nowadays. One example I'll quickly share is that he was involved in the first creation of the NTSC television format still in use today. So it's basically his fault why PAL territories got screwed over. Stupid 50 Hz not being able to import cheap US games. Anyway, as a physicist and electrical engineer, Tom Goldsmith worked for Dumont Laboratories for 30 years, starting all the way back in 1936. Dumont was one of the leading cathode ray tube manufacturers in the United States for much of that time. During World War II, they made a lot of CRTs for radar displays, which is likely where Goldsmith got the inspiration for his game. Once the war ended, there was finally opportunity to explore alternate uses for CRT displays, like games. And so Goldsmith, along with Estel Ray Mann, set about inventing a game that could be played on a CRT. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not talking about Estel Ray Mann at all, that's simply because we know almost nothing about him. We know that he worked for Dumont alongside Tom Goldsmith, and that's about it. He sadly died in 1965 too, long before anyone else really knew about the CRT amusement device's existence. And that's the thing about the CRT amusement device. Nobody else knew about it for the longest time. It was never made into a commercial product. The prototype is reported to have existed, however, but otherwise we only know about it from its patent. A patent that wasn't rediscovered until 2002. You know, just a casual 5.5 decades after the damn thing was invented. It was once pulled out back in the 1970s during a series of lawsuits involving Magnavox making war on the entire video game industry, but apart from that, the patent was just rotting away in a patent library somewhere for 55 years. But we know about the game now, and so it sits as the first game in the Video Game Chronicles. So, what's it about? Well, you know how I said that Goldsmith was probably influenced by the war and the radar tech he was developing at the time? Well, the CRT device is basically designed like one of those radar displays. On the screen itself would be targets. These were actual stickers you'd place on the surface of the CRT screen and not generated by the game itself. You'd then have control over a single electron beam representing your missiles, which you would manipulate using the dials next to the screen in order to hit the targets. They kind of remind me of those real old school TVs that had those big dials that you had to use to change the channel before TV remotes were invented, if any of you remember that. The dials allowed you to not only control the direction of the beam, but also the timing of the explosion, and, as an early display of player-controlled difficulty, the size and brightness of the beam and its explosion. It's actually pretty neat how some of the design aspects prefigure common design practices today, like the customizable difficulty. All of that is to say that the basic objective of the game is to simply hit the targets. You get 30 seconds to use your missiles to blow up all the enemy targets. When you put it that way, it sounds a whole lot like an early 70s arcade game, don't you think? Now, while it all sounds pretty neat and is actually quite complex for the first video game, in practice, it's not all that fun to play. Right now, you might be asking yourself, hang on, I thought you said this was never made into a commercial product. How can you possibly play it? Well, my friend, that's where the Cathode-Ray Tube Amusement Device Simulator comes in. That's an even better name than the original, don't you think? This is a browser-based simulator that is entirely free to play, housed on the Retro Game Deconstruction Zone blog, along with several other simulators of early video games that I will be using in future episodes. Links in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. The aim of this simulator is to try and replicate, based on the patent, what the game would have played like were it actually put into production. And I'll be honest here, it's not fun. There are two real problems for me here: the controls and what I'm going to call feedback. I'll start with the controls since it's more of a minor critique. While I appreciate the game's attempt to replicate a real radar control panel, in practice it's quite clunky. I think it's not helped by having to use a mouse to click these dials in the simulator. I constantly got the directions confused and it was not intuitive at all. Take this with a grain of salt though, as I do think that the real thing would have felt more intuitive. What's more of a problem for me is the feedback, or rather the lack of feedback. Since the game itself doesn't generate the targets, and you have to put stickers on the screen instead, it means there's no impact from hitting a target. You just guide the missile into the general vicinity of the target, and if you see the explosion touch the target, you'll say, "That'll do, skip," and move on to the next one. There's just no response from the game, no target exploding animation telling you, "Congrats, you did it!" There's just nothing. And it ends up being a real buzzkill. And that now brings us to a new segment for the videos going forward. It's something I like to call the world's biggest video game tier list. Hey, I love a good tier list as much as the next guy, but I thought, why not take it one step further and put every video game in a single tier list? How hard could that be? I've actually been doing this on the blog side of OGC since the very beginning, but I hadn't figured out how to get it into the videos until now. Incidentally, there is some logic and reasoning behind the placements I give here. Over on the blog, I give a detailed breakdown of my thoughts on each game and give them a score out of 100. So if you'd like to understand more about the inner workings of the tier list, feel free to jump over to the blog. Link is in the description. Now, on to placing the CRT amusement device. As I've already said, it's not great. Not a complete failure of a game, so it's at least saved from the disgrace of the S tier, but only just. I'm going to place it in the E tier. It's not much of a game, but as the first one, I think it's at least worth trying out once. Also, don't expect to see many higher tier placements in the near future. Most of these early video games are very shallow, and not what we'd call good games by today's standards. So expect to see a lot of D, E, and F tier placements for a while. There might be a surprise or two along the way, but we'll just have to wait and see about that. So if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for watching, and I hope my regular viewers will enjoy this style of content going forward. And if you're new here and enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content just like this. It all helps the channel grow, and I hope you'll join me next time for another chapter of video game history.